who is an expert in the field, to talk to you about Ready, Set, and Pitch. Mr. Mahfaz is the co-founder of Sri Lanka's first communications agency, specializing in presentation strategy, design, and training. Show and Tell serves clients both in Sri Lanka and USA, helping them to communicate their business story and message with impact and clarity. His company has worked on over 20 investment pitch presentations from a range of industries, including emerging technologies, apparel, hospitality, food, and real estate. The total value of the funding being raised through these decks are over 95 million US dollars. Mr. Mahfaz is a firm believer that clarity of vision is the most important asset for any startup, and he is committed in helping young startups to find their voice and make an impact. With that note, let's ready, set, and pitch. Sir, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Diniti, for that wonderful introduction. So good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today to speak to all of you on how to make an amazing pitch deck. Now, I know that you all have already gone through this process. You all have gone in front of judges and delivered your pitches, but there's always room to improve. Now, before I jump into my presentation, I just want to, first of all, say congratulations to all of you for making it this far. And more importantly, for thinking about agri-tech, right? Because I think agriculture is something that we have taken for granted as a species. We have focused more on our consumerism than about our sustainability. So I'm really happy to see that there are so many initiatives coming together to help improve how technology can help the agriculture industry itself. So thank you very much for your commitment. And I hope today's presentation will help you learn and fine tune how you go in front of investors, in front of judges, and are able to share your vision and share your ideas in a way that they will then believe and back you, right? So that is the objective of today's presentation. Let me quickly pull up my my slides, and then we get started. Hold on. Diniti, just let me know when you can see my slides.
Yes, sir, we can see them.
You see it? Okay, great. Right, so Ready, Set, Pitch is today's presentation, right? So this is how do we get ready to deliver the best presentation that we can. Now, what we will be covering in today's presentation will broadly cover, we'll talk about what do investors look for when you go in front of them. And when I say investors, even panels of judges tend to think like investors, right? So this could be applied to both scenarios. We will also understand the elements of your pitch deck and also how to prepare for a successful pitch or successful delivery, right? So let's jump straight into the very first item, which is understanding the investor mindset. Now, at the end of the day, how great our idea is, how great our technology is, if we cannot get it in the hands of our customers, in the hands of our audience, it is useless, right? And very often, we alone can't do it. We need the help of others to back us and to support us to help get our idea across to the market that we are targeting. So investors are definitely one of the most important players in the startup ecosystem, because we need to be able to get them to believe in what we are trying to sell them. Now, the most important point that I want to share with you is the next slide, which is a reminder that even your investors are human beings. Now, the reason I put this slide, which might seem absolutely ridiculous, but it's a very important slide because sometimes we as startup entrepreneurs, as startup founders, forget that our investors are humans. We see them as just walking wallets that have unlimited amounts of money to throw into every single idea that comes their way, right? So we understand that they are human beings. They are driven by emotion. They are driven by self-preservation. So when we have that in mind, we are able to better put our content and ideas across because we know we are talking to other human beings themselves. Now, once you start the journey of trying to raise funding or pitching to people, you will need to understand a very important thing about investment or pitching, which is that fundraising or pitching is all about storytelling, right? So it's an opportunity for us to basically convince a group of people that what we have is something that is really worth getting on board with. Our job as as founders, as entrepreneurs, is to basically go in front of these people and we have to share our stories, share our vision, share our passion with them so that they understand what we're getting into. They believe that we are the best people to make it happen and they want to be a part of that journey, right? That's the most important thing. It's not just about the money, it's about being part of that journey. Now, one of the common things that I see with a lot of investment pitches and a lot of startups is we miss the ball because we think that as a startup, our job is to go and raise funding. We might need the money to grow our business, but that is not the reason your startup exists. And this is something that lots of investors also admit, that when they talk to a startup or a founder, what they want to hear is, why do you love your problem? Not why do you love your solution? The reason for this is when you love your problem, no matter what happens, you will keep working at it until the problem is solved. And even if one idea, maybe the technology or the solution that you have built right now doesn't work, you will find another solution. And if that doesn't work, you will find another solution. You won't give up until your problem is solved, right? And this is one of the reasons that a lot of investors say, fall in love with your problem, not your solution, because solutions can change. In the startup scene, you hear this word pivoting, right? A startup would have started in one area with one idea, but 3 years later will be doing something completely different. But when you really look at it, at the underlying, the backbone of the startup has not changed. The problem that they're trying to solve is always the same, right? So you should always learn to love your problem and be able to talk about your problem, right? Be able to convince other people that this problem matters. Because if not, if you don't care about your problem, you will keep on changing your business, right? You will lose focus, you will lose direction. But when you know this is where I want to get, I want to solve this problem at any cost. When an investor sees that, when a panel of judges sees that, they are going to say, this guy is going to make it, or she has the passion to make it happen, and we need to back them, right? So this is one of the most important lessons that you need to learn when it comes to pitching. It's about showing that you love your problem and that you will not stop at anything to make that problem go away. Now, even though you might have the greatest idea, it's very important that when you go in front of a panel of investors, that you have the right mindset. You need to know who you're talking to, right? Now, very often, a lot of startups, a lot of founders, the way they think about investors, they think about them as this bottomless wells of money, right? They simply think, I don't need to care about anything. I just have to go and say, listen, we have an amazing idea. We need 10 million rupees or 100 million rupees or 200 million rupees to make it happen. And they will just give it to us. That doesn't happen, right? People are not just throwing away money just because you ask it from them. Very often when an investor is looking to invest, they look for a few things, right? Now, the number one they look at is, if I give you this money, will it be used to grow the business? And will it be used to capture more market share, right? So they want to know that you have a strategy, you have a plan to make sure that the business is growing with the money that they're giving you. The second thing that some investors look for is, can they add value to the equation, right? This is especially true when it comes to angel investors, because they are taking a higher risk and they want to get more involved in getting the returns from their investment, right? So what they do is they take board seats, they get involved in day-to-day operations, and they want to see that, do I have the knowledge to get involved? If you watch programs like Shark Tank, you will notice that sometimes they will say, listen, I'm not going to get involved in yours. I'm not going to give you a deal because I don't know anything about this industry, right? I don't have contacts. I don't have suppliers. I don't have customers. So I'm not going to get involved. So very often investors are not looking to be dumb money. They want to be money. They want to come on board and bring their experience, their knowledge to give the startup an edge and take it to a larger scale. The third thing is they look at, can they give business insights? How can you run the business better? Where should you be putting your money? How do you manage your teams? Is there anything on those points that they can add value to the core team that is running the business? Again, they are trying to add value so that their investment is more secure. And finally, they want to give money to the places where they have the highest possibility of return. And this is something very important, right? Because what sometimes happens is we think just because we have an amazing idea, no one has thought about it, the world's very first time we are doing it and we are doing it better than anybody else in the world, people are going to throw money at you. It doesn't happen that way. See, at the end of the day, if I'm the investor, I have a finite amount of money that I'm going to invest in your company. It might be 20 million, 30 million, 50 million, whatever it is, right? If I give you that money, it means I don't have that money to put into another business, right? Now, you might have the greatest idea, but it might take you 10 years to become a profitable business. But there might be another idea which is not as complicated, not as technologically advanced, not as revolutionary, but those guys can give me money give me returns in maybe 3 or 4 years. Now, what I would normally do is I would probably go after the second one because the money is more secure. I have a higher chance of getting the money back. So what we need to make sure is, as startup founders, don't simply think of, I'm just taking the money, then I have freedom to do whatever I want with it. When you're pitching, you need to go in with the mindset, how do I get this money back? How do I give it back to the investor more than what he has given me? Right? So that is something that you need to keep in mind whenever you're creating your pitch deck, because that will define what you include and what you don't include, right? And your strategies also need to be built in order to focus on that return on investment, right? So next, what you have to think about is, what do we put into our pitch deck? So now, generally, when you think about your presentation, you might have a lot of ideas that you put, right? You might have content, coming out of your ears that needs to get into the presentation. But generally, when you think about it, depending on what phase of your business that you're in, right? The content that will be the most important to an investor changes. So if you're an early stage company, maybe you're just an idea, just a prototype, you're just getting into you're not still got into the market. At an early stage, what investors are going to look for is, who is the team? Do they love their problem? Are they going to keep working at it until they become successful? Is there a big enough market for this particular product, right? And then what is the problem it's solving and how well are we solving that problem? The reason they look at these three things is because from here, you can keep pivoting, right? You can keep changing your business until you find the perfect model. Right? So early stage startups, these things are what is most important. And a lot of investors say that they invest on the team or the individual more than the idea. Right? So the team is where the magic really happens. As you grow, as you go into the market, you get traction, you get customers coming and paying you, you will start seeing that people are going to start looking for different things. Right? You will start seeing that investors want to see traction. How many customers are you getting every month? What is the product market fit? How well is your product, serving the needs of the customer? How many segments are you all in? What are the different ways that the product can be applied, right? The team, how well is the team working? Do you all have the necessary skills and the people to make the business grow? And then also finally, the market size and how big a market are you trying to get into? So again, what happens here is the investors look at different things, right? So if you all are early stage in a startup, and usually for hackathons, you normally see a lot of the early stage ideas. That is what the panel is looking for. But if you are a little bit more mature, you need to talk about those things also, because that is where you build your credibility. That is where you build the proof that you're the guys who deserve to get the prize money or the investment. Now, I said, if you notice in both of these, one of the most important items I said was the team. And what a lot of investors look for is, what are the characteristics of the team? Is the team driven? Do they have a passion for the problem that they're solving? Are they coachable? Right? I know investors who have turned away from startups because they just know that the founder won't listen. Right? The founder is not coachable. Because of that, they move away. Does the team have domain knowledge? Right? Do they know what industry they're getting into, or do they just know the technology side of it? Right? Do they have the skills? You know, your core team, your founding team, do they have all the skills that are required to make this business successful? And if you don't have those skills, do you as the founding team know what is missing? Right? So maybe all of you are engineers, but then you might need somebody who can handle business development. So you need somebody, so you need to know, okay, we need to hire somebody for that. So do you know where your gaps are? Or are you going to make an engineer a salesperson? Can he do the job? Or can she do that job? So you need to understand. So for a team is one of the most critical elements in any investment. And that is true across all the different levels. So I have worked on seed funding, Series A, Series B. No matter what the funding is, people are always concerned about the team. If the team has some kind of an issue, you can guarantee that that investment is not going to become anything of value to the investor. And the next thing I want to remind you is, as founders, we need to understand what our priorities are. Right? It doesn't mean just because you have a startup, just because you have a cool technology, or you have you're using some kind of emerging tech, that your job is just to go and raise funding. Right? Your valuation is not the measure of your success. The most important thing that all startups should always remember is to chase after customers, not investors. The reason I say this is, there are certain startups who think, okay, we have an idea, we know how to make it happen, but we don't have the money. So they just keep going and raising money, right? So they raise the first round, second round, and their valuation keeps going up, right? 100 million, 200 million, 300 million, whatever, you know, your number keeps going up and you feel a sense of satisfaction. But what happens is, you're running the business on that borrowed money, which means that at some point it's going to stop, and then you're going to find yourself in hot water. So if you make yourself a customer-driven company, meaning you go and try to close customers, your customers are the best investors, right? Because they are not only giving you the money, but they're also buying your product. They're going to give you feedback. And the more customers you have, the more traction that you get in the market, you are going to have more leverage when it comes to investment negotiations. Right? So you need to always be mindful not to chase after investors, but try to get customers. There are startups who have basically said, listen, I'm not going to waste my time going after any more investors. I'm going to first we are going to build a business that is going to be successful, that investors are going to want to come into our business. If you have that mindset, when you go in front of an investment panel, you will be able to assure them that their money is secure. But if you go there and you have I have raised money from this company, I have raised money from this company, this venture capital company is backing me, this investor has come on board, that is not going to impress most of the serious investors. Right? So make sure that you look at your marketing, how do you get your customers, and how do you keep your customers happy and paying. Right? That's the most important thing. So I just want to, before we move into the actual deck, I want to just talk about one thing, which is the differentiation between pitch contests or hackathons or any kind of a competition versus equity-based funding. So equity-based funding is where you actually go to an investor and raise money. the content that you deliver will be very similar, but what they're looking for will be very different. And even you need to also be quite aware of this, because may not knowing it, if you go to in front of an investor with a pitch mindset or a competition mindset, you're going to lose out, right? So let's just understand the differences, and then we'll move into the what do you actually put into your deck. So starting off, one of the first things you need to understand is ownership, right? In most competitions, there is no ownership factor, right? They don't expect to get any shares in the company. They don't expect to get any kind of equity, preferential or or common shares, nothing. Right? They are going to, competition is over, you're out of the picture, right? That is generally how most pitch competitions happen. But in equity-based funding, usually the investor is going to want some kind of ownership in the company. Some investors will say, we want 10%, 15%, 20%. It will all vary depending on the valuation that is associated to your company, right? So your valuation is basically the amount of money you're getting paid for the percentage of the company, right? So if somebody's giving you 10%, your valuation is, for 10% for say 10 million, your valuation is about 100 million rupees, if I'm not mistaken, right? So equity-based funding is, mostly equity. The equity is the key element in that equation. The second thing is control. Now, when it comes to control, your pitch competitions generally have a very little control factor, right? Some competitions or some grants will ask you to have milestones. As you achieve milestones, you will be given the money. Some competitions is just flat money, right? You will get your cash up, you get one check, and then it's all done and dusted. Usually, when it comes to control for equity-based funding, if an investor has put in money, they will want some kind of controls. So they will either take a seat on the board, or they will say, okay, any check over this amount of money, they want to be, has to require 2 signatories. They might say that every week you need to send them certain reports, right? So they want a little bit more control because they are putting big money into your company, right? And they want to make sure that money comes back to them safe and sound and with friends. The next thing is value, right? Generally in a pitch competition, there is a fixed amount, like maybe 500,000, 1 million, 250,000, whatever. There's a certain amount that will be associated. In equity-based funding, this amount changes, and that is where your pitch deck really comes into play. Because the more clarity that you have about your market, about your business strategy, about how you're going to grow your business, your valuation can go higher. You can put a higher valuation to your company. And if an investor feels more secure about investing with you, they are going to be willing to give up more money or give up the money at a lower equity. They might want less shares for the same money, which means that you're going to get a higher valuation for your company. And finally, it comes to the return on investment, right? So generally for a pitch competition, they don't really have a return on investment per se. They want to know that they are selected the best company who will have the highest potential and who will do the most good with the money that they have been given, right? But when it comes to equity funding, your investor is going to want some kind of return, right? So if you take, for example, these days, if I put some money in a fixed deposit, I'm going to get maybe 5, 7, 9% in interest back on that equity. But if I'm putting in money into a startup, I'm willing to wait longer, but I want to get several times more money, right? If I give you 10 million rupees, I want you to give me back 30 million, 40 million, 50 million rupees, right? So that's why you have this 1x, 2x, 3x returns. So if I give you 10 million and you give me 20 million, that means there's a 2x return on my investment, right? So you want to try and invest in the startups that can give you the highest multiple on your return. So as you can see, the core differences in a pitch competition, they are looking for the best idea. And while in an investment, equity-based funding, they are looking for the business that has the highest potential return on investment, right? It might not be the best idea, but it might have the greatest market viability, right? It might have the greatest market potential. So I hope at this point you all have kind of got a good idea of what investors and judges are going to be, thinking about. What are they going to be looking for in your startup pitches? And now let's jump into the actual pitch deck, right? So what are the elements that go into your pitch deck? And let's break this down first, right? So let's understand what exactly is a pitch and what exactly is a pitch deck. I'm sure you already know this, but just in case, when you think about it, what a pitch is basically a pitch is an opportunity for you to go in front of an audience of influential people and convince them to come on board and back you, right? So that is what a pitch is. That's the event. The pitch deck is something that accompanies a pitch. It's something that supports the pitch, and that's usually a set of slides. But it doesn't need to be, right? For example, there are stories about Richard Branson, right? Richard Branson is one of those investors. You can go and convince him if you have a really good idea and you're able to describe your idea on the back of a napkin. Those are the kind of investments that companies that he wants to back, right? So you can make an entire pitch only with what is drawn on a napkin, right? So pitch deck is just usually a set of slides, but it can be anything, right? There are stories of startups which go on to in front of a client and they basically in front of an investor, and they basically draw on a whiteboard their entire story and basically get the funding that they need, right? So a pitch deck doesn't need to be slides, but very often slides are probably the least risky option when it comes to getting your story across to your investors. Now, what do you put into your pitch deck, right? So what's very important to understand is your pitch deck is a story. Right? It might not look like a typical story, but it is a story. It's a story of your startup. It's where it came from, where it has come, what has it gone through, and where is it going. So that is what you're trying to show in your pitch deck. And generally, these are most of the common things that you see in your pitch deck. I'm covering things that might not be included in this hackathon's factors as well. But you have your scoring sheet, you might be able to understand what needs to go in, but definitely having these are not going to impact you, right? Not having it might, but having an extra thing doesn't make a big difference because you're just trying to reinforce the content that you have and the idea that you have. So what we'll do now is let's go through each of these slides and look at what do we put into this and what do we need to keep in mind when we are preparing them. So let's start with the very first slide, the cover slide. This is probably the most important slide because it's the first slide that your investor is going to look at. And if you don't catch their attention, if you don't make them excited on this slide, you might end up losing their interest and they are not going to pay attention, or you're going to be trying to win their attention for the rest of the presentation. Right? So on this slide, 3 things you must have. You need to have your company logo, you need to have your company name, and you need to have, if possible, one line, right? This is like your elevator pitch, right? We'll look at how do you come up with this one line in the next couple of slides, but this one line is your core value proposition. What is it that you're really, really trying to achieve by your startup? So a few things that you want to keep in mind when you're creating your cover slide. Keep it clean, right? Keep it focused. Even if you're putting an image, pick an image that really doesn't clutter the slide, doesn't make it difficult to read. Keep it very, very clean and focused. Second is make sure that your logo and your company name are in a very prominent position, right? There are certain startup pitches that I have seen. The background is so cluttered, there are so many people and so many things happening. And then the founder goes and puts the logo in this one corner where nobody sees it, which is useless, right? You need to have a logo. You need your logo and your company name has to really stand out on your slide. But at the same time, don't go and make your logo and company name so big on the slide that you can't really see it, right? When it's so large and it's on a big screen, it might be very difficult to read. Because I have seen this as well, right? So I've seen startups that come and put, the name of the companies all across the slide. And it's so big, it takes a lot of you to like move back to be able to read what is on the slide. So make sure that you place your logo in a very carefully, strategically decided location. and make sure that that one-liner really captures the core message of your presentation, right? Of your product rather, right? What is it that you're really trying to solve? Not, and one thing that I would suggest is avoid jargon, right? We are building a cutting edge agrotech solution. Everyone is building cutting edge. It's not cutting edge anymore. We are building the most innovative solution. Where is the research? How can you call it the most innovative solution unless you have research say that there's no other solution that is better than yours, right? So try to keep it very simple, right? You might have some problem that you're solving, just focus on that problem and say, this is what we want. At the end of the day, when our customers use our product, this is why they will use it, right? Because we make their lives better, or we help them become, we help them achieve their targets, we help to save the ecosystem, whatever it is. There might be a few sentence words, just focus on that and avoid jargon, right? Because everyone is using jargon, then no one is using jargon, right? So these are two things, right? Coming up with a one-liner, two things that you can, two ways you can approach it, right? So the most common way that a lot of startups, a lot of people go with is this problem idea, right? So when you say a problem, this is where what we say is, this is why customers choose to come and buy your product. While the frustration is, what is it that's going to make them decide to buy your product? I know it's a little confusing, right? But simply put, it's logic versus emotion, right? So let me show you two examples. Right now, I know you all are agri-tech startups, but I'm going to use something that is a little bit more relevant or easier for me to think of, or something more closer to my heart, which is customer relationship management, right? So customer relationship management is basically software that helps you make sure that when customers contact you, that you are able to find them, you are not going to forget them, and you are able to manage all the new business opportunities that are coming into your business in a very systematic and organized way. Now, if I had a CRM or a customer relationship management software, and I wanted to sell it from a point of view of the problem, right? So my one line on the screen could be something like this, right? I could say, Mafaza's CRM, right? We help you manage sales funnels and leads for your business success. It explains what the problem. No, we are telling them your problem is you can't manage your sales funnel, which is the journey of a customer from interest to sale, and your leads are when they are shown genuine commitment. You can't manage that. Right? So we want to manage it for you with our software and make sure that you are able to become successful as a business by getting your customers coming into your business on a consistent basis. This is a totally acceptable elevator pitch, right? This one line is totally acceptable, right? But research and so many communication professionals recommend going on the frustration focus, right? The frustration focus looks at what is it that's driving the decision to make a purchase, right? So I know because of the problem, I know that my CRM, this problem my customers are having is that they forget that they have to send out proposals, they forget that they have to send out quotations, they forget that they have to follow up on proposals they have sent, they forget that they have to send out agreements, right? So that's the problem that they're having. And now they want to buy software that is going to make sure that none of those problems happen anymore. Now, rather than putting the problem, I could put a statement, a one-liner saying, Mafaza CRM, we help businesses easily achieve their revenue goals. Because when you don't get sales, you're not going to get revenue, right? So and without revenue, the business can't operate. So this is what you are saying is, one is sales, but what does not having sales do to your business, right? It means that you're not going to have revenue. You're not going to be able to achieve targets. You're going to be worried about, whether you can pay salaries, whether you can have your lights on, whether you can pay the rent, right? So what you want to do is, if you can say that this is what we're looking at, and this is not from an investor's point of view, right? You put this from your customer's point of view. So the minute you can put this, right, the minute you can show an investor, I understand my customer's frustration, right? This is not something that all startups do, right? So the minute you do it, the investor knows that you're someone who genuinely understands and wants the customer to be happy with your product, and you're trying to help the customer with your product. And that is where they will then want to come on board and support you as well, right? So these are two approaches. If you are able to think about the frustration and make that your elevator pitch, make that the one-liner that you have on your first cover slide, because that will get your audience to be really focused and see, okay, how do these guys do this, right? And they will pay attention for the remaining 10 or 12 slides that you are going to be presenting. Right. So this was a cover slide, right? I know I spent a lot of time because it's so important. Right? So let's jump now to the next slide, which is the problem and opportunity. Now, this is where your journey as a startup begins, right? We have a problem, we found a problem, and we say in entrepreneurs world, there is no such word as a problem. There are only opportunities. Every problem is an opportunity, right? So we said, okay, we found a problem and we realized that we can solve it in this way, right? So what you want to do on this slide is you want to showcase what is the pain point that you're addressing. What's the problem that you're solving? You want to showcase who is a target market and how big that target market is for your product, right? So a few things that you want to keep in mind when you're designing this slide is don't just come and put like this random, generic statements, right? Don't say farmers need better ways of managing their crops. Okay, so what, right? We all know that. So you need to instead try to quantify it. Say that due to, because there is this problem, maybe farmers can't see weather patterns, right? They don't consider weather patterns. Because of that, farmers are losing 2 billion rupees worth of output, what do you call this, stock, right? Produce. They're losing 2 billion rupees worth of produce each year because of this, right? Or they're losing so many hours or so many minutes of the day, and because of that number of minutes is equal to this amount of money, right? So try to put some numbers behind your assumptions, right? Or your pain points. And the reason you want to put these numbers is that shows that you have done your market research. That shows that there is a viable reason for this product to exist, right? So if you don't have, if people don't feel the pain in their wallet, they're not going to give you money to solve that problem, right? That's the simple logic here. But at the same time, you can't make up these numbers. You need to have some logical, rational, assumptions and some research done to figure out what these numbers are. And be sure that you also are very clear on the focus of who your target demographic is. So when I say target demographic is, who is it that you are going to sell to? So you're not going to sell to all the farmers or all the farms or all the tea estates or other estates. You might have a particular niche, right? You might be looking at, farms that have at least 200 acres of farmland, right? Something. You might have certain metrics that you're going to say, this is the kind of customer who will need our product, right? Again, you don't want to be too generic. The more specific you are, the more focused you are, shows that you know your market, you know your business, and avoid the percentage rule. So sometimes you see startups coming and saying, in Sri Lanka, we export 4 billion rupees, or I think maybe $4 billion worth of rice or some or cinnamon, where they say we export 2 billion rupees worth of cinnamon every year. If we implement our solution and we are able to capture 1% of this, we will be able to make so much money, right? That is one of the fastest ways to get kicked out of an investment meeting, right? Because just because there is 1%, 1% might be a very small percentage number, but the absolute figure, right? What does 1% represent? Might be massive, and you might have to, be a massive, huge organization to capture that 1%. Just because it's 1% doesn't mean it's small, right? If your market is big enough, 1% could be millions and millions of people, right? So make sure that you focus on, never use this percentage rule. Try to come with concrete numbers. And when it comes to your market format, right, like your market size, this is a very common model that we use, right? So we start with the total available market. This is anyone and everyone who can buy your product, right? So you might say tea estates, rubber estates, coconut estates, all of them need our product, right? And that is maybe 5,000 companies that need it, right? So you know that that's the total addressable market. That's everyone. If every single person who needs your product buys it, this is the number of companies that will buy it. But that is never realistic, right? So what you do then is we look at, okay, from this total available market, what is the market that we can service, right? So you might say, okay, there are 5,000 rubber, tea, and coconut estates, but for a company to really value the technology that we have created, they might need to have at least 50 acres or 150 acres of land, right? Now this 5,000 suddenly became 2,000, right? Still, okay, that's your serviceable market. That's the minimum market that can buy, who will need your product, right? Then you come to this thing called the share of market. So these are the people who are most likely to need your product, who will immediately want to buy it, right? So this is what we call the low-hanging fruit, right? So they are just there. If you just come out with the product with the right price, they will buy it, right? So again, you say, okay, now this 2,000, 150 acres or whatever acres of land or more are the ones who want it. So 2,000 farms or estates are available. Now you're saying you need, but the companies that will really want this are the companies that also export out of Sri Lanka and who have a annual revenue of at least 50 million rupees, right? Or 500 million rupees, right? Whatever, right? Some number. Now suddenly your 2,000 companies would have become maybe 350, 400 companies, right? But that's not a small number, right? Yes, out of 5,450 might be nothing, right? But 450 customers, finding 450 customers, convincing them to buy your product is a challenge on its own, right? So you say we will focus on this 450 customers, we will win them first, and then we will go to the next group and next group and next group, right? So the idea what you want to show an investor is I am laser focused on who we want to capture. And we know who will want our product the most. Therefore, we will start with them and then we will go to the other markets. And then what you're effectively doing is you're going after the easiest market. You're convincing them to buy your product. And then you're saying, okay, let's now go to, then they will become advocates. They will, the proof of concept. They are using it. They are getting business from it. Then the next group, right? Maybe companies over 150 acres who are making 25 million or more, right? They will want to buy your product. So then they will be part of the serviceable market. Then they become your share market. So the idea here is you want to show an investor that you know who your customers are and you know who you are going to go after and who is the easiest people to win over and bring into the company as customers, right? The more clarity you have on this, the likelier, the higher chance that the investor is going to say, listen, these guys know what they're doing. Therefore, they are a better company to back than the other company in the on that same day or who I met the day before. Right? So I hope those two things were clear: the market size and the problem and opportunity. Now we come to the solution. So what we have done all this time is showing the investor or the panel of judges that there is a problem, and that problem is big enough for us to want to solve it. Right? So this is where the solution comes. Right? So in the solution, you have to talk about what your solution is and why it will work, right? So this is two important things. And the reason I highlight the why it will work is there's nothing saying that somebody else can't do the same thing, right? But you have to have something that is going to make sure that it is going to be the solution, right? Because whatever the problem is, people have been, handling it in some way, right? So they are not, even though you haven't, the technology hasn't come, they have found some manual way of handling this problem, right? So because of that, you need to know, you have to be able to explain why people will want to use our solution. So a few things that you want to keep in mind when designing this slide. Number one, don't get over enthusiastic and try to over explain your solution, right? The simpler you can explain your solution, the better, because that shows that you have a deep knowledge about your business problem, right? Or how your system works. So keep it simple, and give it to them in the most basic, simple way possible for them to understand, right? Focus more on what is the value that your business is going to create, your solution is going to create, right? Don't just get carried away with, this is a technology, we are using AI, Bitcoin, blockchain. Don't get carried away with that, right? This is the problem. People have this issue, we are giving them a solution that is going to address that issue by doing these things, right? Simple, focus on the problem that you're solving and the problem your customers are having. And then you can always correlate, right? You can always show them, listen, we talked earlier that these estates are losing 50,000 rupees each month because of this problem, right? Our solution can reduce that loss from 50,000 rupees a month. We can bring it down to 10,000 rupees a month, right? So try to show these numbers so that then there's an easy way of comparing, right? You can see, okay, there's a 50,000 problem. Now these guys they're saving the company 40,000 rupees, right? So if you know that you can go to the customer and sell the product to them for 30,000 rupees. They're still making 10,000 rupees profit on their earlier problem that they were having, right? So all of this shows market knowledge, business knowledge, industry knowledge, right? And be very customer focused, right? Don't go into this meeting with the idea that you have to wow the investor with your tech, right? I will talk about this later, but your tech is secondary. Your business is primary, right? So be very customer focused. What's the problem they're solving? Sometimes people think, this investor, he's into AI and all of this. If I use the word AI, if I use the word bots and machine learning, he will come on board, right? It doesn't work that way, right? That is probably the worst kind of investor that you want, because those are the investors who are just going to pressure you to keep going into new technology and not really solving the problem that you have set out to solve, right? So be very customer focused. And then we come to the competitive edge, or what I like to call the magic sauce, right? So what we remember is, now you know the solution. We know what the solution is. You know how we know the problem. We know that the problem is big enough, and we know how we are going to solve it. Now we have to say, why is it that we are going to be successful at solving this, which nobody else has thought about? So that is your competitive edge, right? So you need to talk about what is it that gives you the unfair advantage, right? What is it that's going to stop anyone else from immediately copying you once you have started, right? What is it that will make you successful before anyone else? And do you know who your competitors are, right? Yeah, let me talk about this a little bit in the next points. So here are things you want to keep in mind, right? Your competitive edge can be your process, it can be your partnership, it can be your network, it can be your algorithm, any of these things, right? There are, it can be a combination of these things even. So you need to spend some time and figure out what is it that gives me the advantage over anyone else who is going to be using this technology, because you're not the only one who can code, right? There's probably somebody else who can code as well, but maybe you have, your family members who are in the farming industry. Maybe you have already got you have some experience in that industry, in the agri-tech industry, right? Or the agriculture industry, right? So you might have all this information that might be something that others can't duplicate, as others can't take advantage of without a little bit of effort, right? So that's your unique advantage. So think about this, figure it out. So it has to be something that's unduplicatable, right? So it has to be something that nobody can quickly copy, right? It's difficult to say unduplicatable because anything is duplicatable, right? But generally what happens is, if you have a competitive edge, you will always stay ahead of the curve, right? Why is Pickme still the bigger player than Uber? Uber is a global giant, but Pickme is still Sri Lanka's leading taxi hailing company. Why are all the other tiny fellows coming and going without ever making a dent in the market? Because Pickme has a localized product. That is something that is Sri Lankan, right? So because of that, that is an advantage that they have that another player can't do, right? And they have multiple advantages. They have already a network of customers. They have already a network of three-wheel drivers and cabs, right? So that network is always going to be in their favor. Others are going to always be playing catch up, right? So it can be a combination of things as well when it comes to your competitive edge, right? And understand how you're different from your competition. So sometimes you hear startups saying, oh no, we have no competition, which is very, very unlikely. Right now, even myself, and I like to say, Show and Tell is the only presentation design and strategy company in Sri Lanka. We have no competition. Right? It is nice to say and a nice thing to believe, but in reality, that is not true. Right? We do have competition. Graphic designers are competition. There are overseas companies who are our competition. Right? Sometimes we have customers who will say, we will work with, my nephew or my niece can do this on PowerPoint. Right? They are my competition. Right? So you need to be a little bit more objective. Don't get carried away with your tech. Don't get carried away with how cool your algorithm is. Be very objective. If not me, who else can solve this problem for the customer? It might not be tech. It might be very manual, right? But they are a competitor. And know your numbers, right? You need to know what is your burn rate, how much money do you spend every month to keep your operations going, what is your cost of customer acquisition, how much do you need to spend to win a new customer, right? What is the lifetime value of a customer? That means how, if you once you get a customer, how long will they be with you and how much will they pay you while they're in their relationship with you. So you need to know these numbers, because again is a competitive edge, right? If you're able to acquire customers at a lower cost of acquisition than your competitors, that's an advantage, right? If you have a lower burn rate, that's an advantage. If you have a higher lifetime value, that's an advantage, right? So you need to know these numbers, because these are what the panel is also going to want to know when it comes to your pitches. And if you have these numbers, you can put them on the slide or you can keep them away, but know it well. So if they ask a question, immediately answer that question and say, this is my burn rate, this is my LTV, this is my COCA, whatever it is, you can give the numbers off the tip of your tongue, right? And something I need to tell, and I think this is something that is very often misrepresented by a lot of startups, domain knowledge and being cheaper are not competitive advantages, right? I have had real estate startups who come and say, I was in the real estate industry, and then I found that this was not being done. I'm starting my startup to solve this problem, right? And no one else has figured it out. It might be true. No one else might have figured it out. But just because you have figured it out doesn't mean that nobody else knows that problem, right? So once you have done the hard work, you have built the market, they will just come and say, okay, I have more domain, I have more experience, and I'm going to build the same product, but do it better, right? So that's why sometimes the second player is the one who has an advantage more than the first one. The first one has to go create the market, make the awareness. The second one comes in and captures the whole market in a go, right? So the solution is not to stop the second one, but to be aware that how to mitigate it as a first one, right? And being cheaper, definitely the worst excuse for being your competitive edge, right? Because if you are able to offer your solution, then the current market player, let's say the current market player is charging a 10% commission, and you come and say, okay, I will give it at 8% commission. I can guarantee you, if that is successful, within a few months, there'll be another player who comes and says, I will give it at 7.5% commission. And all your customers will move to that person, right? So you don't want to create that kind of a market. So try to always don't get caught in this false trap of thinking that your domain knowledge and your competitive edge or your price are your advantage. Next, you need to be aware of your revenue models and your go-to-market strategy. So what are your revenue models? How many ways can you earn money for your business, right? What traction have you got? How many customers have you got? How much interest have you got in each of these models, if any, right? And what are your go-to-market strategies? How are you going to enter the market and capture the customer's interest in the market? So a few things you want to keep in mind here. Keep it simple, right? Don't come up with complicated formulas, complicated equations. These are the advertising, partnership, commissions, hardware, support and maintenance, whatever. Have 2 or 3 revenue streams, because if you have only one revenue stream, you're a high risk business. There's very low revenue potential, right? So keep it simple and keep a bit of diversity, right? So that's the point 1. So have multiple revenue streams and have firm numbers, right? So rather than simply saying, okay, we are going to be charging 5 to 10%, give a firm number, make a decision, right? 8%. No one is going to hold you to these numbers for the rest of your life, right? So you can always change the numbers later on, but you want to show the investor that you are decisive, right? That you know what you're getting into, right? And again, try to match your numbers to the pain point cost, right? So for example, like in that estate example that I said, okay, the estate is losing 50,000 rupees each month. If you come up with a solution that's going to cost them 100,000 rupees each month, they're not going to buy it. They will rather lose 50,000 than pay you 100,000, right? So you need to match that numbers, right? So this is some small way of showing you can show that there is a big enough pain point that customers are going to want to pay for your product, right? Next is the intellectual property, right? So this is what is ideal protects your solution, right? So number 1 is, how do you keep your idea from being copied by other people, right? It needs to be something unique, it needs to be something protectable and something unknown to others, right? So like for example, Coca-Cola, their formula is not known to anybody, right? So it's not patented. So we can't even look at the patents and find out they are not using patent protection. They are simply using they're keeping the industry like a business secret, right? So very few people know the exact formula that goes into making the perfect Coca-Cola drink, right? And try to visually present the solution components, right, and how they work together. The reason is sometimes, especially in tech, your infrastructure or your architecture is also something of an advantage, right? That could be an IP that you have come up with. Your algorithm, your architecture could be something that makes your product, unduplicatable, right? You don't need to have IP for your startup. You could simply be a really good business model, right? So you don't need to have IP, but it is always good if you have IP to show off, right? Show it to the investor, because that just gives you extra credibility. So what can you do when you're coming up with IP? Keep it simple. Look at it from like a 20,000 foot view, right? Don't go into all the nitty-gritties and how does the algorithm work? Is it this kind of formulas and things? Don't go into all of that. And don't worry about whether it's like perfect, right? Don't worry about the nuts and bolts and how all the things are working. Just keep it very high level. And like I said, like Coca-Cola, your IP doesn't need to be something that needs to be patented, right? It could just be something that is unduplicatable, right? Again, not a mandatory thing, good to have, but definitely worth explaining to an investor if you have something. Now, definitely one thing that you, as a tech company, what you want to do is you want to have your infrastructure or your architecture showcased to your investor. So one way you can do is keep it very simple, right? Just show them at a very high level how all the different modules work, right? Your interface layer, business layer, data layer, integration layer, just boxes and cubes are enough. Right? Don't need to go into like, there is a form, this is a method that is called here, and this is a method that is called there. All of that is not necessary, right? Very high level, explain it to them, because they just want to know, do you have a solid business model or solid systems architecture that can scale, that can work well, and that you have given some thought to. Next is the leadership team, right? So you want to talk about who are your core team members, what are the skills that they bring to the industry, to the company, and also what is the aspect of the business that they are focused on, right? So every team member has to add value to the overall objectives of the company, right? No one should be there just for the sake of being somebody's best friend or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your brother or your sister. They need to be somebody who brings value to the company. Otherwise, investors will see them as dead weight, right? They're just paying this person money to not really do anything for the company. So a few things to keep in mind. don't make this your CV or your LinkedIn profile, right? Include things that are focused on the business. What is it that the business needs? If you have, you have done art in school, that doesn't matter unless you're the UI designer of the product, right? So make sure that you're talking only about the things that are relevant to your business need, right? Include only the core team, right? Don't confuse the investor. Just because you have maybe friends who have helped out, or as developers, as other people, but they might not be part of the strategic team who are running the business. So don't include them. Keep it very focused. Just say these are the people who are the main decision makers in the future of this business. That is what the investor wants to know, right? Define clear designations and what is the roles that they are going to be playing. And then we come to the last two slides, which is the financials, right? So financials, try to work out some kind of financial plan for at least a 5-year forecast. How much sales you're going to get, what are your expenses, how much profit you're going to make at the end of the day, and then also understand what is your cash requirement, right? How much money do you need each month? When are you going to run out of money, right? And then know your numbers very well, right? You need to know how these numbers came. Don't just take the numbers that your some friend made and gave it to you. Sit with them and explain how did you come up with this number. Learn all the numbers inside out. So a few things. When you're creating a revenue plan, you can work on assumptions. First year, I will have so many customers. Second year, so many customers. Third year, so many customers, right? And keep it simple. Just include your income, your sales, your cost of goods, your GP, expenditure, and net profit, right? The reason for this is if an investor is going to put money into your company, they will do something called a due diligence, which is where they will sit and go through your books in great detail, right? So anything that is more nuanced, more detailed, that will come up at that negotiations, right? So here you just want to give them a high level picture of how your business would possibly look like as you go year on year, right? And also try to show when your business will become cash flow positive and when you might need to raise more money, right? So you might be raising 10 million rupees, today, but you might need in another 2 years or another 18 months, another $2 million rupees, right? So how do you plan out this, your cash flow, right? So if you can show that, within 2 years, I'm going to be cash flow positive, that's always a good thing. At some point, you're going to be cash flow positive, which means that your sales are going to be covering the cost of operations. And as a rule of thumb, right, this is something that is, I think I personally advocate for, is don't think of any, as founders, when we take investment, we have a responsibility to return that money because that is somebody else's hard-earned money, right? It shouldn't just be like, you took it and you wasted it, and now tough, the business went down the drain, right? It shouldn't be like that, right? So you need to think about it and say, okay, how do I make this? How can I give this money back at some point? So minimum, you need to try and ask for an amount that over 5 years or over 10 years, you will be able to return back to the investor through dividends, right? It might not be ideal, but if you can show that, right, in 7 years, I will have paid you back the amount that you invested, right? Maybe 10 million rupees. I would have paid you back that in 7 years. That will actually show the investor that you're focused on returning his money or returning her money, right? So try to think about this and try to figure out, okay, and it's not how much profit you get, it's the percentage of the profit that the person owns, right? So if you have a 100,000 rupee profit and your investor owns 10%, he's only going to get 10% of 100,000, not the entire 100,000 as his repayment, right? So these are just a few things you want to keep in mind when it comes to the financials. And finally, is the use of funds, right? So make sure that you know why, if you're asking for a certain amount of money, how much money you want and how you're going to use that money, right? And where that money is going to get spent. These are 3 things you need to keep in mind when you're asking for money, because if you don't know these 3 things, you're guaranteed that the investor is going to be like, this guy just wants to take the money and go and have a party, right? That shouldn't be the case. You need to have a very strategic plan on how the money is going to be used. So a few things you want to keep in mind. Try to put money in places that's going to generate revenue, right? Try to avoid putting money on things like rent, salaries, things like, because those are, once that money goes, it's gone, right? But if you put money on marketing, on trade fairs, on exhibitions, on customer outreach, road shows, that's going to eventually translate into new business, right? So try to allocate. It's fine to put money to operational expenses. That's totally okay, but try to keep more money going towards revenue generating expenses, and try to quantify the growth that is going to be achieved from this. So if I earn, if you give me 10 million rupees, I'm going to be able to grow the company by 3%, right? Or 4% or 10%, whatever, right? Some percentage number which show, and that should be based on your profit or your sales. Right? And sometimes some people come and say, you know what, we want to ask for 1 million rupees from you, but our total round is 10 million rupees. It doesn't matter, because that's actually bad, right? Just because I give you 1 million, unless you get the full 10 million, the remaining 9 million, my 1 million is useless, right? So try to focus on the money that you're earning. If you get the money, how that money is going to be spent, right? Don't talk about how the total round is going to be spent. And then, of course, if it comes to, especially for pitch competitions, you can, depending on the company, depending on the organizers, you can look at other ways that the money will be benefiting the business, right? So how many new employees are you going to recruit? How many new markets are you getting into? So all of those things are value adds that will show that, my money is going to be used for something beneficial for the company and for the society. So those are the top slides that you want to have in any presentation. And what I want to kind of close off here on this section is, remember that your pitch is about the evolution of your business, right? So if you notice, when we looked at it, we started with the problem, we went into the solution. How are we going to get the solution to who needs a solution? How are we going to get it into the market? How are we going to be successful? How are we going to grow the business? So you kind of go through this journey. So you're trying to take the investor through the journey of your startup, or the story of your startup, right? So that is what I mean, that it's about storytelling, right? So that's why it's about telling your story and getting the investor excited about being part of that journey. Right. So let's now quickly move on to the last section of today's presentation, which is how do you prepare for your pitch, right? So you can have the best technology, you can have the best slides, but when you go in front of the panel and you speak, if you're not able to convince them, if you're not able to make sure that they understand your ideas and your pitch properly, what's the point, right? All that effort is wasted. Right? So I'm going to just share a few tips that you can keep in mind when you're preparing for your presentation. So number one, don't worry about having pretty slides, right? Pretty is not necessary. Just because you have pretty slides doesn't mean that your pitch is good, right? But it has to be clear, right? Your content has to be very carefully prepared and well thought out, so that it doesn't confuse the audience and the investors or the panel of judges. Try to avoid having large amounts of content on your slides, right? So wherever you can, try to visualize your content. If you can put a graph, you can put a infographic style, or put some bullet, nice art, like creative way of putting your content. Try to do that, because you only have 7 minutes to pitch your idea, right? So you need the audience, you need the investor or the panel of judges to be able to get your your content like that. Right? So try to visualize your content as much as possible, so that it's easier for the audience and the judges and the investors to absorb what you're trying to say. Next is know your timing, right? So usually any competition or any investment pitch, you have a pitch presentation and then you have Q&A, right? From what I understood, for this particular hackathon, you have 7 minutes to pitch your presentation and then a 5-minute Q&A, which is a luxury, right? Generally, you have 5 minutes of presentations and 10 minutes for Q&A, or 3 minutes of presentations and 10 minutes for Q&A. Right? This is definitely a great luxury. So you have to use your time smartly, right? So you want to show in your presentation that I know what I'm doing, and then you want to show in the Q&A that I am credible in the ability to execute what I have planned, right? So that is what you're trying to achieve through your presentation. Now, one of the most common things that I see when it comes to presentations is we don't practice, right? We don't plan what we're going to say. We know our startup, we know our tech, we know our product. Who needs to prepare? Don't have that mindset, right? You need to prepare, right? So just think of it like this, right? Now you have 10 slides and you have and each bucket is one slide, right? And you have a grain, a packet of rice. Think of each grain of rice as one word. Now you have 7 minutes to speak, 7 minutes to present, which means that you altogether have about 840 grains of rice, because on average, most people speak at about 120 words per minute, right? This fluctuates. Some people speak at 100, some people speak faster, but 120 is a comfortable, pleasant speaking rate, right? So you have 840 grains of rice. Now, what happens most of the time when a lot of people come to pitch, they do this. They spend all the time talking about the problem, how the farmers are affected, how the current system is broken. This is how our solution is going to work. This is the technology. They spend all the time on that first few slides, right? Then they suddenly realize, now time is running out. I need to catch up on the rest of it, which is the worst thing that you can do, because from a business point of view, how you're running your business is much more important than the problem that you're solving, right? So what you want to do is you want to plan out how much time you spend on each slide, right? What do you say and how do you plan it out? So one very effective technique, and I know that I know startups who have used this and who have come back to me and said it was very helpful, is to have a small guide, right? So what we do here is we know that we have 840 words altogether. So on average, we can spend about 84 words per slide. Now, obviously, every slide won't need 84 words. So what you do is you start writing your script, right? So once you write one, what am I going to say on slide number 1? You count how many words do you have. Okay, now this slide, it might be 20 words. Now I have 84 words minus 20, I have 64 words left. I can now reallocate those words into one of the other sections. So I can allocate it into maybe the problem or into the proposed solution or the revenue model, right? That way, at the end of the time, right, when you come down, when you've finished your script for all 10 slides, you're using your time in the most effective way, and you're not going to be spending too much time on one slide and then not have enough time for the remaining slides. Again, one thing I would say is, if you are able to finish your presentation early, do it, right? Don't speak for 10 minutes or 7 minutes only just because you have 7 minutes. If you're able to tell your idea, tell your solution, tell your business potential within 5 minutes, do it in 5 minutes and close the door, right? Because the only thing you will do speaking for the remaining 2 minutes is confuse your audience, right? So just use the minimum number of words that you can, but make sure that your content is crystal clear. And sometimes one really good way of doing that is bringing somebody who's completely alien, right? So I was in one of the pitch competitions, and one way that we did this was we got our receptionist to come and sit in the room and listen to us pitch, right? She doesn't have any technical knowledge, but because she's just an average person who doesn't know anything about technology, if she understood our pitch, we knew that anyone can understand it, right? So this was one technique that you can use. Bring somebody else, maybe your parents, maybe your some friend, but somebody who is not part of your business, right? Who isn't part of your startup story. Right. Next is the 3 letters that are the secret to success in any presentation, or the secret to great presentations. PPR. What is PPR? So this is an acronym which is prepare, practice, and rehearse. So the difference between this is, so prepare is basically make your slides, think about your content. Practice is you have your script, read it over and over again until you have it not only memorized, it's internalized, right? Then once you know your script, you know what you have to say on every slide, start rehearsing. Now, what do you mean by rehearsing? Rehearsing means you don't look at your slides, you don't look at your script. You start from the first slide and you go on till the last slide. If you forget something, you say something else and you keep the flow going, right? So the idea is you might rehearse maybe 15, 20 times. Each time will be slightly different. But what you're doing is you're training yourself. If I forget something, I know how to pivot and continue talking without making the audience feel like I have forgotten some important part of your presentation, right? So these are three things that if you practice it, and minimum, you need to practice your pitch at least 15 to 20 times before you go in front of your panel of judges, right? 7 minutes. So if you can do it in one day, you need to only spend 1 hour, right? For 10 times, right? 70 minutes, little over 1 hour for 10 attempts, right? So distribute it throughout the day, but rehearse at least 20 times before you are called on front of your panel of judges or in front of an investor. And finally, remember that things will go wrong. So always be prepared. I remember we designed a presentation of a friend of mine designed a presentation for his startup. Everything was great. He has planned everything out. And when he went for the competition, he gave the pen drive, they plugged it into onto their laptop to project it on the big screen. And the font was not there. So all his beautifully designed slides went for a 6 because PowerPoint just put some random font and the entire pitch looked completely hideous, right? In spite of that, he managed to come second because he had worked on his content, right? So that is something that I would say, or don't let, if something goes wrong, don't be too worried, but just be prepared. Have a second copy, have it as a PDF, have a laptop ready, right? Sometimes if you're going in for a meeting, individual meeting, have a projector ready, right? Whatever you can think of that could go wrong, have a backup plan. If something goes wrong, tough luck, but try to adapt and survive. That is what startup is all about. So thank you very much. And so just to kind of recap what we talked about today, right? When you're preparing your slides, think of it from the investor's point of view. They are investing in you. You are risky, right? How can you show an investor that you are not a risky investment, right? It's not about you, it's about the investor. How do you reassure them? It's not about showing how cool you are, how cool your technology is. It's about showing them that you are going to create value and get them money back, right? Show them that you have a plan for success. You should have a strategy for market, for development, for everything. Show them that you're someone who's capable of doing that. Create curiosity, get them excited, right? Know your numbers flat out. You need to know those numbers inside and outside, and plan what you say. Don't go there and say, I am the master, I can talk about this in my sleep. Trust me, you will put the audience to sleep and you will lose a great opportunity. And practice, prepare, practice, and rehearse. Right. So thank you very much to all of you for listening to my session. I think I went on a little longer than planned, but I'm happy to take any questions, and I'll hand over controls back to our host. And if you all have any questions or you need any assistance or support, my phone number and email address are on the screen. Please just take a note of it, and you can always reach out to me. I'll be happy to help you out in any way I can. Right? Diniti, back to you.
Thank you very much, sir. It is indeed a great session. So I think it's now time for a quick Q&A session. If you have any questions you would like to direct it to Mr. Mahfaz, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask the questions, or you can type them in the chat box. No worries, you can unmute yourselves and ask the questions, or you can just type them in the chat.
Yeah, and also if you want, you can ask your question in Sinhala. I can probably handle that.
I think everyone understood today's session perfectly. So I guess.
Or they are completely confused.
Marking the end of a great session by Mr. Mafaz Itham, I'd like to thank you for taking your time off your busy schedule to enlighten us and to share your thoughts on the topic of ready, set, and pitch. Thank you very much, sir.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Signing off from today's webinar, I'm Dr. Diniti Randani. Stay safe and have a great evening.